Part 2. There is a real world out there, and we are part of it. But it is possible to divide this world into two realms, the objective and the subjective. The objective world is the world of entities, relationships, or qualities that exist independently of any number of observers. The subjective world is the world of entities, relationships, or qualities which, in contrast to the objective world, are totally dependent upon an individual subject. Thus I am subject to my own thoughts, feelings, and perceptions, and the existence of these is both private and contingent upon my own existence. If you and I are sitting at a wooden table, the table exists objectively, since it does not depend on us for its existence. On the other hand, my experience of the feeling, smell, or appearance of the table is totally private. You cannot look at me and feel what I am feeling. If I start thinking metaphysical thoughts about what makes a table, these are not accessible to you as an object unless I decide to share them with you. Even then there will be a distinction between my thought about tables as my thoughts, which are subjective, and my expressed thoughts about the table as an object accessible to both of us, an intentional object. Now, materialism claims that everything which exists is material, which is to say that everything in reality is some kind of a body or wave or construction, which is in principle measurable and quantifiable. However, plenty of things seem to exist in reality which do not meet this criteria. These include at least abstractions, essences, qualities, values, principles, the content of propositions, and numbers. It is plainly absurd to ask, how much honor can you fit into a 1-gallon milk bottle, or what is the molar weight of the principle of non-contradiction, or how many atoms are in the number 7? For this reason, materialists or mechanistic theists like Descartes have, over the last several hundred years of philosophy, tended to divide knowledge in the following way. Real things are by definition composed of matter and quantifiable. Objective things are the most real, since they are general and not private. So the realm of objectivity is the realm of the real, and the realm of the real is the realm of what's material, quantifiable, etc. On the other hand, essences, qualities, values, principles, the content of proposition, and numbers are subjective and not real, or at least not part of the same world, a la Descartes. If you are trying to find out about objective reality, you will need to visit the scientist in his laboratory, because reality is material and measurable. Indeed, the role of philosophy itself is largely to be the handmaiden of the physical sciences, making its conclusions clearer to the common folk. While not all materialists go as far as the positivists in this regard, this general picture of reality is practically synonymous with atheism. Anything which does not meet this criteria of objective reality, as defined by materialist presuppositions, is considered to be some sort of mental event. Mental events like qualities, abstractions, values, etc. may be useful for getting the scientific ball rolling, but they aren't really real. Indeed, they can in principle be explained in materialist terms, and eventually everything will. Now, if an entity has to be material in order to exist, then obviously God cannot exist, neither can a soul. So to sum up, objective things are material and real. Subjective things are either unreal or reducible to material things. Now, in critiquing this conception of reality, the first thing to do is to make some distinctions among entities that can be thought about. Some of the objects of my thought exist in reality apart from anybody thinking about them, and some only exist because somebody has thought about them, but cannot exist on their own. We'll call the first category real beings, and the second category beings of reason. Real beings include things like tables, chairs, ducks, geometrical entities, the number 7, Julius Caesar, Bill Clinton, and amino acids and angels, if they exist. Beings of reason include things like Oedipus, Macbeth, unicorns, scientific hypotheses that have not yet been verified, the square root of -1, angels, if they don't exist, and other things which are not in fact instantiated in reality, but which can be thought about or discussed, or things which might be real but whose reality is a matter of dispute and thus are currently being entertained as an idea. These categories should not be confused with the subjective-objective division. Macbeth is a literary character, and so does not enjoy reality apart from some minds. But Macbeth is hardly subjective. The character of Macbeth is, in some sense, part of the world of stories that people tell, and he will continue to be so long after you and I are dead. To go back to our table example, you and I can sit at the objective table and have a long, detailed debate over the moral character of Macbeth. Is he really a tragic hero? Did he ever display any virtue? Etc., etc. Yet in doing so, we are discussing something external to ourselves whose existence is not dependent on our minds in particular. although the continued existence of Macbeth as an object is dependent on the existence of some minds. Likewise, we can discuss Julius Caesar, who really did exist whether or not anybody knows it, and even if everybody on earth were to forget that he existed, but who only exists now in memory. But whether we are talking about Macbeth or Caesar, each is objective, inasmuch as he is the object of our thoughts and is not dependent upon my thoughts or your thoughts. Now it is true that my thoughts about these entities are subjective inasmuch as they are my thoughts, and my thoughts are private events occurring within me. But the question as to their reality is a separate question from the question of in what sense they are objective or subjective. So much then for the claim that objective means real or material, for Macbeth is neither a real being, nor is he a material being. His status, like Julius Caesar, is that of an intentional object, intermediate between subjective and objective, even though Macbeth did not exist and Julius Caesar did. Now let us turn to geometrical entities and their properties. Consider Euclid's proof of the Pythagorean theorem. Is it subjective? If so, then like your feelings, your sensations, your thoughts, it would be completely tied up in and dependent upon you. But obviously it's not. Perhaps it is dependent in some sense on the whole human race, or on a certain number of people who understand it, like Macbeth or the English language. But that can't be right either, because this proof demonstrates certain necessary truths which are entirely abstract and in no way dependent for their truth on any number of people. If tomorrow an asteroid were to wipe out the human race, it would still be true that the area of the square built upon the hypotenuse of a right triangle is equal to the sum of the areas of the squares upon the remaining sides. That will always be true, and always has been true. If there were 1 billion universes, each with different elements, entities, and properties, Euclid's proof will be true in all of them. Knowledge of this sort is among the most objective that it is possible for a human being to have, and yet the proof is entirely immaterial. The proof cannot, even in principle, refer to a material being, because it is a proof about an idealized form, a perfect right triangle, perfect squares, perfectly straight line segments, etc., none of which can ever exist in physical reality. However, it is precisely on the basis of such universal knowledge that we are able to acquire intellectual knowledge of particulars. Our senses put us in contact with the external world, in which everything is individuated and nothing is completely identical in its materiality with anything else. It is only on the basis of immaterial universals like these geometrical proofs, or knowledge of essential forms like animal, vegetation, whale, fly, etc., that we can understand and categorize particulars. But these essences or definitions are substantive and useful precisely because they are not material. If thought were like imagination or the senses and being particularized and material, we would never be able to rise above the level of the cleverest primates. These creatures have memory and imagination and the ability to combine these faculties in order to solve certain problems by trial and error. They cannot abstract an essence from particulars. They cannot grasp the purely immaterial substance of a thing. It should be noted that although I can't go into many more examples in this video while keeping it to a reasonable length, it's not just mathematical forms which are objective and immaterial. Propositions are also universals, and the substantive content of any sentence is irreducible to the sounds, marks, or even language in which it is expressed. Thus the phrases, "it is hot" and "hace calor" express the same meaning. Suppose you have 2 men, one American and one a Spaniard. The American knows a little Spanish, the Spaniard a little English. The American needs to ask the Spaniard for a coffee, while the Spaniard wants to make sure that the American understands that Spanish coffee is made in hot milk. If meaning were reducible to matter, then this communication should be impossible. Because it is not reducible to matter, this kind of communication occurs all the time. For that matter, if meaning didn't transcend matter, you'd never be able to learn a new language. Math, because it's transnational and simple, is just the easiest way to see this. The last thing to point out here is that subjectivity does not necessarily mean unreality. My feelings, my thoughts, my sensory experience, and my evaluations are facts about me, but may also be facts about the world outside of me. The fact that they are subjective inasmuch as they are private does not make them unreal, because I am real and I encounter a world outside of me. They can be true or false, appropriate or inappropriate when they describe or correspond to something outside of me, but inasmuch as they are properties of me, they are real. If my thought doesn't correspond to reality, it is false, but not unreal. If my emotional response to some external fact is inappropriate, well then it's inappropriate, but not unreal. If I value something in a way that does not match its nature, then my valuation is false, but it doesn't follow from this fact that values are meaningless or are reducible to subjectivity. When I work out a Euclidean proof, that thought process is private, but it corresponds to a truth which does not depend on me, or on Euclid for that matter. In the same way, one cannot respond to a moral claim by saying, "Ah, yes, but valuation is subjective." So what? Values have an external referent which is an objective claim about the nature of things. You may claim that there are no such natures, but you cannot dismiss moral considerations on the grounds that valuation is subjective. That's a different question. That would be as foolish as claiming that there's no material world because qualia are subjective. In my next video, I'll address materialist monism and nominalism and briefly sum up the considerations raised here.